Hello, welcome to the San Francisco International Arts Festival 2019 interview series. I'm your host, Yasmin Mora, and today I'm going to be interviewing the festival director, Andrew Wood. Hello, Andrew. So, what is the San Francisco International Arts Festival and what is its mission?
The festival is an annual event, a performing arts event. It features about 60 different companies performing from San Francisco, the Bay Area, and from countries around the world. And most of the international artists are artists that have never performed in the United States before and who do not have US representation. The mission of the festival is to really to bring in these ideas and voices that aren't seen here or have never been seen in this country before, and to try and have them interact with a local artist population, for them to see each other's work, and for there to be some type of osmosis of ideas between the locals and the internationals, and then to bring an audience from the Bay Area to see the work, and also from a national audience and a professional audience of presenters from around the country.
So, what can one expect attending it for the first time?
Well, I think the best thing to do is go to the website and look at the calendar before you come, because we have multiple performances every day, Thursday through Sunday. There's performances on Thursday and Friday evenings, and then all day Saturday and Sunday. So you could spend a day at the Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture, which is where the festival takes place, seeing 4 or 5 different performances. You can also take class and sort of see panel discussions and get a lot of contextual information on the different performances that are happening.
Tell us the history about the festival and what the first festival was like.
Well, the festival came about because, the Bay Area, if our own gossip is to be believed, has more artists living here per capita than anywhere else in the country. The thing is, though, is the population base isn't enough always to support those artists. So what we wanted to do was create an event that would bring in people from outside to see work here, with a view to trying to get it presented in other parts of the country as well, to create earned income opportunities for those artists. So the first festival was in 2003, and again, we were presenting artists that nobody had ever heard of here before. The first headline artist we had was a gentleman named Akram Khan from the United Kingdom, and it was his first West Coast tour, and nobody had ever heard of Akram Khan. I saw him in Barcelona last year, and he was doing his final farewell performance as a soloist, having become one of the most famous contemporary choreographers in the world. But when he came to San Francisco in 2003, nobody had ever heard of him.
So, what inspired you to start the San Francisco International Arts Festival?
Like I said, we have a very large artist population here, and we don't have the ability to support all of them. So we have to create other ways for them to earn an income. And one of the ways we're trying to do it is by putting up a platform where other presenters will come from around the country to see them work, or see their work in order to present it somewhere else. But also, the United States is kind of isolated, and a lot of work that is presented internationally never gets to this country, and a lot of what gets to this country never gets to San Francisco. So we kind of exist in this utopian bubble here, where people are often quite insular, and they're very satisfied with what they see because there's so many artists that live here. But there's also a lot of ideas and artistic work that's thinking very differently that never gets here, and it never gets to inform the process of the people that are making work here.
What is special about the festival of 2019?
For this year, I mean, the theme is the path to democracy, and it's been a sort of an idea of, we oppose the Trump administration, we protest the Trump administration. That was the last 2 years, and this year we're trying to say, well, if we don't like Donald Trump or the Trump administration, what are the things that we do like, and what do we want to suggest as ideas for democracy? So what we've done with some of the work is we've looked at the path to democracy in other countries and how they've manifested themselves. So if you look at a group like Collective Maluba, they're coming from Syria. This is their US debut. They are all Syrian refugees. And there was the Arab Spring in 2011, which was about democracy, which was about how do we create, or how do they create democracies in the Middle East. That spun horribly out of control with the Syrian civil war, but it created a lot of refugees from that. And the piece is about the relationship between people who live in Damascus still and who are trying to function and live in a war zone, and should they stay there to keep fighting what they support, or should they flee? And that is the question about that piece. It's titled "Your Love Is Fire," but it's also a very shrewd psychological drama in that the playwright in this piece has actually become a refugee in real life, but also he creates a playwright in the play, and the playwright is messing with the characters because he's in Berlin, and his three characters are all, or three characters are all still in Damascus. So what happens in the end is that they all set up their plans, and it's the playwright that won't let them execute their plans. So it's not just about a war. It's really about a human psychological drama about, well, we want to do these things, we can't do these things, we're trapped, we're trapped by things beyond our control. And in the case of the characters, the thing that's beyond their control is the playwright. So it's a metaphor for the war, but it's not just about the war. It's something that can operate on different levels for audiences all over the world who will understand what they're talking about without actually having to be refugees from a war zone. So that's an example of how people are trying to attain democracy and what are the impediments to them doing that in Syria. Another piece we have is from the Czech Republic, and it's actually based on a Václav Havel play. And Havel wrote a piece or a play titled Audience, and he wrote it just after the Prague Spring in 1968. And it was about a playwright, Havel, but not called Havel, who has to go and work in a brewery because he has no money and because he's oppressed by the communist regime. So he goes there, and it turns out that the person who runs the brewery is also a communist spy. And so he invites Havel, or the playwright, in to have a beer with him, and then just pumps him for information about all of his leads, all of his sources, all of the people that might be in this sort of democratic activist cell that Havel's a part of. And it's almost nostalgic now in that it's a very funny piece. But obviously at the time it was far more serious. But again, that's an example of a people trying to attain democracy in a place that's more totalitarian. And even there's a group coming from Hong Kong called Theatre de la Foule, and they've created a physical theatre interpretation of a theatre piece called The Orphan of Zhao, which is the oldest sort of Chinese theatre story. And it's about it's a revenge story about a clan that was promised something by the ruler and was then murdered by the ruler, and the only one that survived was the orphan, and he had to, and his role, his goal in life was to go and avenge the death of his family. But this piece was written or was made in 2014, which in Hong Kong was the time of the Yellow Umbrella protests, which was the people of Hong Kong realizing that the Chinese government from Beijing was not going to honor the 50-year deal they had about keeping democracy in Hong Kong, and they were going to encroach on that a long time before the 50 years was up. So the people of Hong Kong rose up, and because they didn't want to be seen as aggressors or doing anything violent, their symbol of protest was a yellow umbrella. And The Orphan of Zhao doesn't talk anything explicitly about that, except it was made at the time during the backdrop of this, and they're trying to say, well, how important is it to stand up for what is true and what you believe in? So they're not, overtly referencing democracy in Hong Kong, and this piece is toured all over China. But that's their one of the background issues that's going on with this piece.
Very interesting. And what are some of the premieres and shows that you especially look forward to this year?
The premieres, well, again, there's some of the locals are doing work that is, again, it's not overtly about democracy, but there's one, Theatre Flamenco de San Francisco, are making a work called Rock Flamenco, and it's about the confluence between flamenco music and rock music. And it doesn't sound very overtly political, and it isn't, but except that in Spain, when in the 1970s, after the dictator Franco died, there was this re-embracing of democracy in Spain. And a lot of what the people who were doing rock andaluz were experimenting with was this idea of democracy returning to Spain. And so the flamenco musicians and artists who decided to experiment in this form with them were treated as heretics by the traditional flamenco establishment, because this was not pure flamenco by any shape or in any shape or form. It was something that was very radically different, and so they were seen as revolutionaries. They were seen as people that were just going against what the standard was. But 30 years later, that's now seen as one of the golden periods of flamenco in Spain, was when these two different art forms joined together and created a whole different art form out of it, or a related art form that's now seen as something. Oh, this was very special. Mm-hmm. So Carola Zertuche from Theatre Flamenco de San Francisco is recreating that. So I think for me that's one of the local pieces that's important, and I'm sure there's others if I turn the page here. Yeah, and the one that I'm really interested in seeing is Jessica Laurel. She's going to be one of our opening night performances, and she is a music artist. She graduated recently from Stanford, and she is going to be singing songs from her, I think it's her debut album called War Love, and again it's a lot of the work is about social justice. A lot of the songs and the lyrics are about social justice, and she brings this in with a passion and a band that is really about also celebrating her roots growing up in Chicago, doing a lot of gospel singing. So it's this mix of what do we think is democracy, what do we think is justice, put into a gospel beat. So that's another artist that's local that I'm really interested in seeing this year.
Very interesting. Every year the festival brings 40 to 50 artists working across very different genres. How do you select the shows and put the programs together?
Well, the difference is that all the international work is finished work. It's touring work, so I've seen it. And now we have budget restrictions, so I see about 50% of it live. I go to other festivals around the world. I travel between July and January to other people's festivals in other countries to see performance work. But because we have a very limited budget, I usually see about 50% of it on video as well. So some of it I'd never get to see live until it comes to the festival. So it represents a little bit of a risk. Most local artists in the festival are making new work. And so it's I've not seen the particular piece before, but I've seen them before. So we've decided that, okay, we've liked your work in the past. So given what we know about we've done in before and what your ideas are for this and who's participating in this piece and what the subject matter is, then we'll say, okay, we'd love to have you as part of the festival, but we need to have some of the international stuff. So that's a known quantity. So we know that if somebody comes to see a lot of new work, which is maybe not necessarily their cup of tea, but they don't know until they get there, there's a lot of other stuff that you can go and see that is known, and that we can say, oh yes, we think this is a really wonderful piece of work.
So how can artists apply to be a part of the festival?
Well, international artists, like I say, I go and see their work, or they send us videos. And again, for the internationals, we're looking for people that are outside of the US market and who don't have US representation. So we're not looking for somebody to have their agent call us and tell us that they're going to be on tour anyway and can we book them a spot. We're looking for people who are not in the US at all. For local artists, they should just send me an email or otherwise get in touch and give us an idea for what they want to do. Most of the local artists self-produce in the festival, which means we don't pay them a guarantee. What they do is we work with Fort Mason to provide free space, and then we provide a lot of sort of support services that go around the performance, and we help them with fundraising, but we don't actually say take financial responsibility for what they do. So they get most of the box office, but they don't get a guarantee. So that tends to make it artists that who do self-produce, but they also have their own infrastructure that allows them to do that. So they have their own dance company or they have their own theater company. And with things like the alumni program, we're trying to work with people who have graduated from universities in Northern California in the last 5 years who have got an arts degree, and they're trying to make the transition from, if you graduated with a dance degree or a degree in acting or something, you're deciding, I don't just want to do other people's work, I want to do my own work, and I want to be the means of production. So if you're going to do that, then there's a whole reliance on raising money and then reporting what's happened to that money. And what so we're trying to catch the people that are at that point in their careers where they decided, I want to do that. And so what the festival offers is a low risk platform for them to experiment with doing that type of work and going through a lot of the motions in regards to creating their own business, and then presenting their work, producing their work, and marketing their work, and then also taking that and then being able to record it and use it for the next phase of their career in a way that is conducive with what they want to do as professional artists.
Okay, so let's talk about the venue because it's definitely worth a mention. Can you tell us a little bit more about the historic site, the restaurants available on site?
Oh, well, the Fort Mason Center are our partners. Fort Mason, as the name implies, used to be the point of embarkation for American troops fighting in the Pacific. It was decommissioned from the military in the mid-1970s, and it was given over to being an arts center. And that transition happened in several different ways, but for about 40 years, Fort Mason was a committed landlord in that they didn't get involved in the arts. They rented to arts organizations. The mandate was that you had to be a nonprofit to be there. So if you weren't a nonprofit, you couldn't even rent space at Fort Mason, and it was at a very below market price. The current administration came in about 2012, and they thought that this wasn't enough, that they really should be more actively involved in what was going on at their venue, and that they should try and take advantage of the assets that are there to really make it a destination place, but also a very live performing and visual arts venue for a lot of different communities. So when we first went to Fort Mason, we rented 2 theaters from them. Now they give us half a dozen venues at no cost. So it's which allowed us to increase the amount of programming that we're doing to about 60 different companies a year in 5 or 6 different venues with programming that happens all day long. So that's for us is how the relationship has changed over the course of the last now 10 years. That allows us to experiment with all these different types of ideas around having a day-long program, being able to present different types of artists, being able to attract presenters because we have enough programming density that allows them to see 4 or 5 shows in the course of 2 days. That makes it worth their while coming. And I think that because it's all in one space, I go to a lot of festivals around the world where they're citywide, and so you're going to see something in one venue, then you're going to jump on a bus or get in a taxi and go and drive for 30 minutes to get to the next venue, and then to the next one, and then to the next one. Here, everything is in walking distance. You can spend the whole day at Fort Mason. You can bring your family. We have a family program series that has a lot of traditional work in it, but also some other contemporary dance and music performances that are very family friendly. But there's restaurants there, and it's a place that's very conducive to wanting to spend the day. And that you can bring your family to, and that you can relax and enjoy. It's very scenic, it's very beautiful, but also that there's a lot of different things to do at the same time.
And in your opinion, what is the best way to experience the festival?
I would buy a festival pass. The festival passes are you can buy one there's a 2-show pass, but the best thing to do is buy a 5-show pass because you can add shows to the 5-show pass. It's $15 increments. But then you could spend a couple of days at the festival seeing whichever shows you wanted, whichever shows took your fancy. And like I say, there's more than 50 different concerts by artists from about 12 countries and the Bay Area. And whether it's theater, music, dance, we have a little bit of circus and other types of things going on. There's something really for any type of taste, really.
Thank you, Andrew. This year's festival starts May 23rd through June 2nd. For more information, you can go to sfiaf.org. Thank you, and see you at the Fort Mason Center.